Hello, everybody. So we are back with our next edition of Victims of Crime. We've got three funeral directors here. We've got Brian from the Undertaking the Podcast. All of a sudden I thought, I wonder if I'm actually going to be pointing at you when the video is going, or if it's backwards, or
you're pointing at me.
Am I?
At least on my computer.
Oh, I might. So Brian has the Undertaking the Podcast thing behind him, and we got Ryan down with the yellow glasses, and they are funeral directors and embalmers down in Indiana. And if you haven't seen them on an episode before, go back and watch previous episodes, guys. And I am Kari, the Mortician. I am a funeral director and embalmer in Michigan. So this is where we talk about a crime and the deceased and how we would handle as embalmers someone in that type of a situation. We're not caring for these exact people. It's more of a hypothetical. So today we're going to be talking dismemberment, and I'm going to be touching on a few different cases because dismemberment can be crime related. It can be accident related. It could be just car accident and somebody's arm comes off. But how do we deal with it? I get asked about decapitation a lot. I don't know if you guys get this, but
you really?
Oh my gosh, a lot. I get some, people are always like, why'd you talk about that? And I'm like, because I get asked about it like incessantly when it comes to things. I think because it seems so hard to imagine that that can actually be a scenario where somebody can be made viewable.
Oh yeah, okay.
And so that's, I think, why I get asked about it. So I'm going to just kind of touch on a few different scenarios. You know, something, some of these might get a little graphic. So warning to anybody that if you don't want to hear graphic stuff, don't listen. Turn me off.
Bounce.
Something also to remember. So I know we've talked about this before, that first responders and law enforcement are the ones, especially in crime, where they're there, they see everything. We talked about this in the last episode quite a bit, but we then also get the pieces and parts, and this dismembered whatever's left over, we get in a bag or multiple bags, and then we have to handle. So it is definitely, we talked about PTSD and things we see and can't unsee and things we have to do. I think when you're standing there with a part of a person that's not attached to the person anymore, it's a pretty surreal moment. Like, have you guys ever just stopped and thought, I'm doing this right now?
100%, but I want to start here because many people think that if there's an investigation, the medical examiner or those who work in the coroner's office will put someone back together for us. And no, that is not the case whatsoever. As a matter of fact, they may not even place them in the body bag in the right, even in the right vicinity of where they could be.
No.
There may be a body part near the feet that doesn't go there. So when we open the bag, we never know what we're going to get.
And we often get, the grass and the dirt and the glass, or, if it was a car accident, we're getting the glass, we're getting the leaves and debris from wherever they pulled them from. They're not going to be, we don't receive them all cleaned up, fresh, put back together. No,
which is okay. I mean, that's our job, but the expectation out there is like, oh, they'll do that for you. No.
So I think that's a good thing to bring up. So the first case I'm gonna just touch on, and you guys can dive in deep to these cases. There was no autopsy photos I couldn't find for anybody. There are some crime scene photos on some of them. Nothing too juicy. So I didn't send the guys any pictures this time. So the first one was Nicole Montavo. So she had dropped off her son at school dropped off her son for caretaking and then was never seen again. So her dismembered body was found buried on property owned by her soon-to-be ex-husband's family. Her body had been burned. So we go back to our burn topic, and severely fractured prior to burial, which did not allow a cause of death to be found. And only small parts of her body were ever recovered. So they didn't find all of her. She'd been burned and cut apart or dismembered or however, somehow, and they found these parts of her buried. Came to the end of the story that her soon-to-be ex-husband and his dad were arrested and were the ones that did this because they wanted to get custody. So first, not even just handling the deceased in this one, guys, but how do you walk through talking to the family about what their possibilities are here?
From the funeral director to me is very, very cautious with talking before I have all the information. So, there's a lot of funeral homes out there that'll make your funeral arrangements before that your loved one is even into their care.
Mhm.
And I try to avoid that at all possible because there's so many more questions I could ask. And in this case, we're talking kind of a normal death, shaving, which way does the hair get combed? Things like that, specific questions that you're not even going to know to ask if you're not able to see the person.
Right.
But in something like this, to where you don't even know what's there, it's real risky. I mean, you can't go making promises when you don't have all the information. So, it's one of those things that's your family's going to be up here. At that first point of contact, and as the funeral director in me wants to bring them down just a little bit, because there's always this outside pressure from the community, from the family, that they need answers now. Someone may die 5 minutes ago, but everyone who's just heard about it wants to know when the funeral is,
Right.
and that just brings up their anxiety. So the funeral director in me wants to bring the family's anxiety down, at least in that process. But going back to what you brought up, I don't know. I don't have a great answer right off the top of my head.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Ryan?
What was the question? I had to stand up.
Oh, no, you're good. I was just asking, in that scenario for Nicole, they, police and investigation and all that aside, we don't know the time delay in there, but, this family calls you and says, hey, our sister, our daughter was murdered. They've found her. And you're sitting there with them, like, how do you discuss what their options are? What do you even say to them in this? Okay, we have part of a hand that's burned, or we have this, is there anything viable I can show them? But then what are you doing? You're showing them this one little body part on a table. What are some potential, what is your first thought if you were brought into that?
I'm with Brian, with this too, in certain aspects here, because if you don't know what you have,
Mhm.
It's hard to really give any type of, just any scenario to the family as to what their options are. But I think, we did talk about in earlier episodes, Kari, the idea that, families do find value in closure, even if it may just be a finger, if it's somebody's hand that has a tattoo on it, because they know that it's recognizable. That's them. That's their loved one. That can be beneficial, but then you'll also have some families that probably don't want to take part in that whatsoever. And that's understandable, because there's nothing easy about that situation. There's nothing easy from a standpoint of guiding them through it, let alone being the family member that's there making arrangements and possibly seeing their loved one. So, I think it's tough without knowing what you have and where you're at from a clinical standpoint. I don't know that you can give them a whole lot of information because you don't know what the challenges are yet. But there are going to be challenges. But even if it's a finger, a toe or foot, I think it's beneficial if the family finds the value in seeing that. And sometimes they have to. Like I said, it's not real unless you see it.
Right.
Did your loved one actually pass away? Or were you just told that by a police officer? I think that's tough. Sometimes that's tough to cope with grief-wise. So what we got,
What are you
Brian?
going to say, Brian?
Well, for me, I mean, with the case that you presented, we're as an embalmer, we're gonna receive those remains from the examiner, and we're gonna do our pre-embalming analysis. Whether we embalm or not, we're gonna do that analysis to see, is this even possible? With the scenario that you presented, it's probably not. You've got a time delay, which is decomposition. We've got fire involved, dismemberment. The fire may delay decomposition a little bit, but also, outside in the elements. So, until you're presented with that situation, it's hard to present a family with options. And, internally for me, I'm thinking, I'm not so sure, because we've talked about those times when family could see just a hand or just a finger. Most of those chances and opportunities are when that hand is connected to a body.
Right.
But if there was a hand on the table not connected to anything, that's a whole nother issue that may cause even more problems. That's a conversation you would probably have with a family, but to recommend that, it'd be real hard for me.
Well, and I think another thing in this scenario too, that's making me think is we have to make sure we don't get caught up in the media of it in terms of, we're hearing what is being found and what they're seeing and what might be there and possibilities. And so if somebody comes in before we've even seen the body, or we're taking the medical examiner's word for what's there before we even see, that can skew our what we can do also. And we've talked about that in some of these cases before. Like, we really have to see firsthand, not get caught up in the maybes, but know for certain what we have in front of us.
I always go back to stay in your lane, though. Don't tell. A coroner has no business telling a family it's going to be a closed casket. It has no business. You have no idea.
All the time, though. Yeah.
What though, and that's a problem. I think that's a major problem, because you're already setting an expectation for the family, whether it's good or bad. You're setting that. I don't know that that's their place.
Well, it's like us calling them and telling them what the cause of death is.
Correct.
However, we do have doctors. Have you guys had where the doctor's like, well, what do you think I should put as the cause? Have you ever had that?
Yeah. You know what I say? That's why you make six figures, hero. So
I'm out. Let me give you the next scenario. So the suitcase killer, and these are just, I brought up a couple this time because people do like to hear about different cases. So in 2004, 3 separate Kenneth Cole suitcases were found containing pieces of a body. And they were found around the Chesapeake Bay in Virginia Beach, Virginia. A body was identified as 39-year-old Bill McGuire, a father and husband. He had been shot multiple times and then dismembered to be disposed of. Ended up, his wife is the one who is charged with the murder. She maintains her innocence. But so and I don't know the delay in the period between, so we're going to have to just really hypothesize this one. But say we get the majority of a body mildly decomposed in our care. Can we re-articulate? What do we at that point? I mean, because there could be an autopsy, but in this case, it's just going to be a couple more incisions into what's already pretty incised, if that's the right words to use. So what would you guys?
I mean, hypothetically, yeah, we can do it. I mean, we would be embalming each section. I hate to say section, but each portion of the body. It is what it is. We would be embalming each one separately. That can be done. And then we would be putting them back together as best we could. I mean, of course, I hate to say it's like a puzzle, but it's exactly like a puzzle. You have a person that is now divided, and then we would be reforming them together. So it's going to be a lot of suturing after the embalming, not prior to, but after the embalming. A lot of suturing, probably a lot of bandaging. Again, firm and dry is coming to mind. And then in this case, you've got, gunshot wounds to fix as well. So hypothetically speaking, could it be done? Absolutely. Until an embalmer is on the scene, we have no idea. But Ryan, what do you think, buddy?
I think you're going to run into challenges, man. I mean, when you've got a dismemberment, that's a pretty wild incision. Not a clean cut by any means. And I think you're going to have retractions of your vascularity. I think you're going to have a hard time locating vascularity to embalm piece by piece.
Is that a word, vascularity? Is that a word?
Oh, yeah. Everything I say is a word.
Let's consult.
Yeah. I make words up all the time, but I'm just like, man, should I know that word?
But, I think that's going to be the challenge. I don't know that piecing someone and actually putting them into their acceptable form is quite as challenging as trying to preserve what's there and to be able to show it. I think that's the other element that you've got to take into consideration as well. So for me, the worry would be preservation. It is a word, isn't it?
Let's go to the dictionary. Vascularity, noun, the quality of state of being vascular. How about that? That's clear. It is a word, though. Well done, Ryan.
We've
Golf
all
clap.
learned today.
I'll tell you what, I feel good. I need this validation. Friends. I really do.
So I think with one thing I say with dismemberment cases is you're going to see what we want you to see.
Yeah.
As if we are having a viewing. So my mind goes to, we can float parts and pieces in fluids. We can do topical. We can preserve them the best we can. We can dry them out. Even if we can't articulate them to the body, if we can't, put them back to the body, we can still put all those pieces in the correct place within a full plastic suit. And if we're missing part of them, if we don't have one leg, we can fill that area out as if there's a leg. And under that clothing, you really don't know what's happening. We've created this visual. It really, like we've said, comes back to the hands and the head. If we don't have the head, we got to, we can wrap up a mannequin styrofoam something and pretend. We can put gloves on. We can do something. So like we've said, the family can at least come in and know that part of their family member is in that made up suit.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We can totally do that. I mean, for those that maybe tune in on the embalming aspect of this, I think our first step is vascular embalming. We're going to try to find a vessel.
Yeah.
I mean, although the circulatory system is incomplete, we can still do it. So that's step one. If we can't do it for step one, then you're looking at hypodermically injecting embalming fluid. You can do topical treatments, like you said, a float or a soak. Again, we're trying to keep this tissue from deteriorating any further, so we can have that surface that's firm and dry to reassemble and in the best term possible. But you're right, you can bring someone back together, and if there may be, let's say, an upper arm missing, we can make that bridge and recreate a radius in multiple different ways.
Yeah, I think what we do is this, I don't know, it's a show in a lot of ways, and we want to make sure what we're doing behind the structure is sound and good, but we also have to make this presentation somehow.
Kari, I want to ask you, would you say in certain aspects we're creating an illusion for the public?
I think there is. And I've kind of said that I've been very vocal about this, so it's nothing I haven't said before, but it's kind of like, cutting the clothing and suturing them back around. So if you have something too big or too small, we're making it fit. It's all behind the person. You're not seeing it, but we're putting a little pin so that the necklace hangs straight, putting something so that the earrings hang up rather than falling backwards. It's these little magicianry things that maybe we do. It's nothing bad. It's nothing that we're doing that's illegal, but it's creating the visual that families are expecting, I think, but we have to do them somehow. So whether it's positioning blocks, whether it's duct tape, whether it's newspaper to create, which people use. I know some people think, newspaper is garbage, but if you have that full couch casket and you lay that newspaper, it gives the seam of the pant line to create that perfect leg seam on a man's suit pant when you have the legs open, the end open. So it goes down to just those little things that we do that there's, I guess, tricks to them, or, but people don't care about all those little tricks. Well, that's why they're watching, because they do care. But when they go in to see their loved one, they just want this visual that's not pleasing, but that's acceptable in some way to them, to have that moment. And we may have to just be doing things, McGuivering, as we've said, behind the scenes to make that happen for them. And they don't want to know you stuck a dowel rod in the body and up the head to get the head on and positioned correctly and stable. You're not going to tell them.
But that's the reality of it.
That is the reality. but they don't want you to explain that. If
Right.
they ask, I'm going to tell them the truth. If they go, did you use a dowel rod and stick it? That's literally what we had to do. I'm going to be honest. I'm asked a blunt, direct question, but I'm not going to explain to that level. A lot of it is really like talking to children in some essence. Like, you want to say things that are not terrifying, that doesn't make them scared of the scenario, but you want to give them enough information to satiate their why, or what questionality of it. So let me give you the next scenario here. After Joel and Lisa Guy is the situation. So this one is just psychotic. So after a Thanksgiving weekend in 2016, Joel Guy Jr. had been home with his parents. He left the house. A wellness check was done when his mom didn't show up for work. So let's get ready for this one, guys. So the deputies walked in and the thermostat on the house was up to 90 degrees. There was heaters plugged in and left on, bringing the temperature up to 93 degrees in the house. So already, if there's somebody in there, we know this is not good. So Joel Guy Sr., who was 61 at the time, had been stabbed 42 times. The knife had damaged his lungs, his liver, his kidney. They were so severe damage, his ribs were completely scraped down, almost clean through some of his ribs. His hands were severed. You've got defensive wounds you're looking at when you have that much, somebody coming at you. His arms were severed. His legs had been removed at the hip and his right foot was removed. So Lisa Guy was stabbed 31 times, so severe that 9 of her ribs were severed. Her legs were cut off below the knee and arms at the shoulder. So he had tried to cut off their legs and their arms. Why he didn't take the parts, I don't know. And her head was found in a pot of water boiling on the stove. He had left it. So that's a whole new level for the funeral embalmer to be getting. But a lot of the parts and pieces of them were put into 45-gallon containers. Like, he had brought in, cut them up, put them in, and then poured in some chemicals to try to
Dissolve,
which makes no sense. I mean, none of this makes sense, obviously. And then the funeral home gets them. So let's talk just a little bit about the brutality of getting this in our care, because it's coming. This person and all these parts are coming to you, and it's a couple. So it's double everything that you're going to be receiving at one time to do a funeral for both of them. And how do we mentally, we talked about this last time, this PTSD of this. This case, I can't even imagine those first responders or people going in to do the wellness check, let alone then what we would receive. Would we receive bags? Are they going to send us jars? Or there's a lot to that. So any thoughts?
I think that the head boiling is going to be tough, depending on how, and I'm going to kind of go a little bit graphic here, I guess, but depending on how long that's been in there, in many cases, that tissue will separate itself from the skull. So, what do you do at that point? I think there's a lot to this case, first off, because then also the chemical they used. Is it a hazardous material? Do we have to take that into consideration here?
Yeah.
When it comes to embalming, when it comes to anything, so there's a lot happening here. And yeah, the mental aspect of it, I'm sure is profound. To walk into a scene like that, personal experience, it's tough. It's tough. And,
wrapping your mind around what you're seeing. I can't even imagine
but here's the thing, to walk in and to see someone's head boiling on a stove. That is a complete mind blown. I would use a different word, but this isn't my platform. I mean, to see that's something, and we've talked about, you can't unsee. That's something that stays forever.
That's
forever.
next level. I mean, this is next level. Obviously, this case is just, thank God that doesn't happen. Like, hopefully in a lifetime for us to ever have to see on our, work side of it, let alone encounter even in our communities or anybody we know. That's insane.
People
Go
are
ahead,
nuts.
Brian. I mean, what do you think?
I don't know. I'm just trying to wrap my head around the whole thing. I mean, you said it was the son, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's clearly a family member, but like, what the hell? Like,
yeah. And there were some, if I remember right now, there's some daughters too, because they had all been there for Thanksgiving and then they had gone home. So now you're sitting with these daughter or daughters, I can't remember specific, making funeral arrangements, and if everything is in this, as someone said, diabolical stew of human remains, there's nothing viable, pretty sure, left. So it is a scenario where you're telling the family there's nothing to see, more than likely. And then you're talking through options. We could bury them together in one casket, we could cremate them, we could, a lot of situations, I can hear a funeral director, cremation is probably your best option because you're not going to want to, because they don't want to handle or deal with probably what's going on there. And aside from taking 2 body bags and placing them in caskets and not handling them,
yeah, I mean, I'm usually a pretty optimistic embalmer, but in this case, I'm not finding an upside to anything I can do. Again, you'd have to see, but even then, I don't know.
I don't think there's much probably to see with 93-degree heat, boiling, the damage to the body from all of the stab wounds is insane.
The boiling is the worst fact of, well, I don't even know if worse. I mean, the whole thing's just awful, but I mean, as an embalmer, boiling, I don't think there's going to be much for me to do. From what I'm listening to, it sounds like a lot of the body parts that were in these containers were probably going to be the limbs. So, basically you've got a trunk and head of dad and a trunk of mom.
Somewhere.
And that's what you got. And poor kids, poor people. Gee whiz.
I don't even know what to say to that one.
I feel like that's like, I'm quitting that day. I don't even.
I think that's a life-changing event. Like, obviously for them, okay. I want to be respectful here because for them that was life-changing, no question about it. For the person though that has to come in, the person that gets the call, the person that has to come in and remove that person from the facility, the house, the residence, whatever, that's a game changer, I think, within your own career, because you really got to pony up a little bit there and say, is this what I want to do? Because it's some of the stuff we see anyway is not natural at all. And some of the stuff we have to deal with isn't. So that to say somebody straight out of mortuary school, and this is their first year,
gosh,
you know what I mean though? Like that.
He's out, I'm done. Yeah, that would break a seasoned professional. I feel, that is going to be a oof.
I think it's a professional decision at that point as to what you're going to do, because I truly believe that changes the entire dynamic of your thought process coming in to help people. People don't think about these cases. I didn't think about these cases coming into mortuary school. Can you imagine being thrown into one? And having to navigate that, and maybe not having the mentality of being able to separate your own emotion from the families and what they're dealing with. That can be tough as well. So,
This is a team scenario. Like you need a team of people. Like you cannot do this as a sole individual and funeral director. Like if you're in a little town, like you need to call on people. You need to have somebody come just hold your hand, help you with your workload, help you with everything else. You don't need to be stoic and there's no ego here. Like get help and have somebody just support you through this. Cause these kind of scenarios cannot do alone.
Because one of the emotions that we really haven't covered is anger. I mean, just listening to this makes me so mad.
Yeah.
And and you gotta put your feelings aside and help the daughters, the survivors, while still be terribly angry at the one they arrested.
Oh, so true. Well, a few things. One more that I'm going to touch on quickly just to give light to. And some of these, especially if maybe nobody's caught, some of these cases we talk about, just to bring a little light to them. Was it Kendrick Johnson? And his kept surfacing that we've talked about, that he's just, nothing has ever concluded with that. So the more it gets brought up, the more, I don't know, it can be looked at. So there was, here in Southwest Michigan, there was a local story, Ashley Young. She had gone out with an acquaintance named Jared and ended up missing. And they had met up and he had killed her on November 29th. And her mom had called in a missing person and nothing was found until his roommate started smelling something, and they found part of her wrapped up in like the stairwell. And as more came forward, they found some more parts of her, but more of the story, his parents were involved with helping dispose of parts of her. And so all of her has never been found. They've got video of like them going into, I think it was a Costco or something, and with a bag, but no bag came out. So they don't know if they went through, they don't know. So there's a lot to it, and they couldn't determine cause of death because without her neck, you can't check for strangulation. Without her head, you can't see if she had been shot or bludgeoned. There's things to these cases. They can't ever have a murder weapon if there's parts missing. So that's part of, I think, these cases as well, is there's sometimes not the conclusions that you can give. What kind of services, and just having had 9/11 too brings up, when you only have parts of somebody, do you move forward with a funeral? Or do you wait to see if there's more? What would you guys do in those scenarios and conversations with families? Because 9/11 was a great prime example of dismemberments, not by somebody taking and physically cutting somebody apart, but because of trauma and accident, that you had parts and pieces of deceased. That, do you wait or do you proceed? What would you guys question,
Honestly, I think it's kind of up to the family as to how they want to do it. Some people want to move through the process quickly. Some people don't, and I think that's really up to the family. And I'm okay with that. If the family does want to do something, they want to wait. I don't know that would necessarily matter to me. I think there is a time though, when it comes on our end, when it comes to storage or things like that, I think there has to be a point where you say we have to do this, at this time. If we haven't gotten anything in 6 months, then we need to make a decision, because it could be years, before everything piece by piece is found. So
if ever,
if ever. I mean, we could be holding on to somebody for an immense amount of time. With no resolution, because there's, the family wants to wait until everything is back. Well, reality is in some of these cases, you're not going to get everything back. So we need to make some decisions at that point. And I think that's us as a funeral director talking to them about this and explaining as gently as possible that we do need to make a decision by this date. I don't know what the or would be, but or what I don't know. I mean, I think it becomes a problem if you put it off too long, and it becomes a problem for the funeral director because it creates an immense amount of liability as well. And I think that has to be taken into consideration. So I don't know what the or would be. We have to do it by this date, or I don't know what that is, but for me, I do think that you would have to set a date that we're going to do this date. We've waited a considerable amount of time with no resolution. So anyway.
Well, I think, Ryan, while you were talking, I was able to think this through. And for me, I think those remains won't be released to us from that medical examiner, that coroner, until maybe they're done looking. I mean, if they're still investigating, that investigation's not over. So if they're still in an active search,
right,
they're not going to release those remains to us as funeral directors through permission of the family anyway. So now that I'm thinking these steps through, if they would release someone to us, then I think it would be appropriate to go ahead and continue with services. But, as a funeral director, you're probably going to have that conversation that, and ideally that medical examiner or coroner would have that conversation with the family that, listen, we don't have everything, but we can't look anymore. So then we as funeral directors know that, and we have that conversation with the family. If here's the contingency plan later, if we find more, I suppose.
What would Brian, let me ask you this. What would the contingency plan be? Like what would that be if we do find more, then what?
Well, I mean, depending on what your services are, whether you've set up a burial or cremation, and, if they find more prior to, then we need to, the contingency plan would be like, well, maybe after the funeral, we don't go right to the crematory, or we don't go right to the cemetery. We bring her back or whomever back, and, let's give it a day or two to see, hey, do we match up? Because I think ideally the family would want them to be whole, going to their final resting spot, wherever that may be. But again, like you said, it's really the family's call. But, I think as advisors and advocates for the family, we don't want them coming in every 6 weeks. Hey, we got to do this whole thing again. Let's go through the paperwork again. Because we're, this time we have a leg, or this time we have an arm. But again, I think a lot of that depends on when those remains will be released to us, because that tells me they're kind of done looking in a way.
Yeah, unless something spontaneously surfaces, they're
Right.
not looking as much for it. I think when I was preparing some of this, and then kind of 9/11 happened just recent, and talks, and you hear more stories, and getting to that point, I had been reading about, some of the funeral directors who they had kind of two scenarios where either you bury what you have, and then they would, if they found more, disinter and add to until you get to a certain point, or you cremate and then you just keep cremating as you get more of the individual and add to it. So bury what you have if you don't want to cremate, and then maybe cremate later and add the cremated remains to the grave space. Cremate what you have and then add more cremated remains too as you go along. I think burying and then disinterring and adding more pieces to that burial seems like opening a gigantic, crazy wound that I think is always going to be a wound that's there because part of your loved one is eternally missing. But I don't know. And like you said, the family kind of has to decide at that point, which one sounds like the least worst.
Yeah, that's what you're picking. You're
Really,
picking
it
the
is.
least worst. Yeah.
Like all these scenarios suck, but which one seems to suck the least for you in this moment? Where does your heart and your gut guide you to which we should do? I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like I would almost say that to a family.
Yeah. I mean, I can't.
Only if you were in that way with the family, if you had that kind of repertoire, because that's what it is.
Yeah. I mean, as a funeral director, I can't recommend that we, disinter every time we find something. You turn out being a yo-yo in the end. And plus, that's a ton of expense to put onto a family.
Oh, for sure.
A ton of expense. So, the family would have the option, if they were a burial family, let's bury. And if they find something later, I mean, you could cremate and, add to the grave site later in a fashion. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think, like I said at the beginning, sometimes we run into these scenarios where it's not crime, it's not somebody that's been cut apart by a criminal. We have car accidents where maybe a leg is amputated from the knee down or something. And so we have the deceased and we have this leg, and we can treat it separately and embalm it separately from the rest of the body and place it in the casket. I think unless the family asked me directly or they had some inkling from maybe the medical examiner, I don't know that I would even bring up the fact that the leg was separate. It would be one of those, if they ask, I would tell them, but I'm not going to say, oh, by the way, this happened. And just so you know, how do you guys feel about that? Are you talking about the damage that's to the body and just bringing it up if the family's not asking, if they're not going to be seeing it?
I've had this. A friend of mine actually was killed in a car accident, and family. Some of the family didn't want to necessarily know those details whatsoever, but I was approached by a family member that wanted a very detailed anatomical walkthrough of what occurred to their loved one. And, I prefaced it like this, in so many words, I basically said, now, do you want me to be graphic? Do you want me to talk about, where certain injuries were and things like that and what occurred there and all that? And this person was like, yeah, just go ahead and just give it to me as you would be talking to any other funeral director. And I did. And more of layman's terms, because, sometimes people don't necessarily know some of the anatomical wording and things like that. But this person found value in that. And I don't know why, but they did, and that helped them. So, it's a tough conversation to have, but do I throw it out there, immediately, just nonchalantly talking to the family in arrangements? No. I mean, if somebody asks, I preface it, it's extremely traumatic and graphic what occurred here. Do you want to hear that?
Yeah.
And then they can make that decision. Some people have said no.
I think sometimes you imagine the worst, and sometimes knowing accuracy over imagination comforts some people, even if it is graphic, but it gives them a more realistic visual and imprint than probably what they're carrying with them at the moment. So sometimes it is better than what they're picturing.
No, I agree.
I'm with Ryan on that. You don't go into graphic detail, but if they ask and they want to know, that the next of kin gets to know. But if cousin Billy comes up to me and wants gory details, he gets to go pound sand, because my trap is shut.
Sorry, Billy.
Bill.
Well, thank you guys for this conversation. We're kind of all over the place with dismemberment and stuff, but
you said that.
Oh, shoot. That's so not what I meant. Did you, on my casket video, I said at the end, I say, see you guys later, or see you soon, I think is how I ended it. And I never, until people started pointing it out, I'm sorry, that's not what I meant. I'm not going to cut this out, because I was going
to say, you cannot cut that out.
It is what it is. And I didn't mean that, did not even mean that to be hurtful to anybody. I'm so sorry. But thank you for joining me. This has been a good conversation, diving into, I think, some things that we can't fix, but that there are possibilities that we can make happen.
Yeah.
Depending on the scenario, and waiting to find out what we're really working with is key before making promises or saying that it's not possible. So, well, thank you everybody for joining us. As always, if you have some type of death or trauma to a body you want us to talk about, and how we could make that person viewable, or what we would do as embalmers or funeral directors, by all means, make sure you post that below. Give us scenarios and cases that we maybe haven't thought of yet to talk about. Thanks to Ryan and Brian from Undertaking the Podcast. Make sure you check out their podcast on any podcast platform. And we'll see you guys on the next Victims of Crime video. Thank you.
See y'all.
Rock and roll, friends.